A landmark Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade, now invalid. Abortions no longer federally protected in the U.S. And state legislatures now regaining their power to decide to what degree, if any, to allow abortion procedures. But nothing expected to change in North Carolina right now. This morning, the U.S. Supreme Court published its 5-4 decision on a Mississippi case that made the 50-year Roe versus Wade precedent unconstitutional. Since news of that decision came down, crowds have gathered outside of the Supreme Court steps. This decision came from the Mississippi case Dobb versus Jackson, which challenged a 2018 Mississippi law banning most abortions after the first 15 weeks of pregnancy. Today, the Supreme Court majority ruled that law is constitutional and issued an opinion that largely matched the leaked draft opinion made public earlier this year.
The outcome is similar to a leaked draft of the court's opinion that appeared in early May. That was written by Justice Samuel Alito. Alito concluded that Roe and a 1992 case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which basically affirmed the right to abortion, were egregiously wrong and needed to be overruled.
In upholding the Mississippi law, the court also ruled Roe is unconstitutional, meaning the federal government does not have the authority to protect abortions. States can decide what is legal. Well, that race last night was so decisive, the analysts called it within 17 minutes of polls closing. That's because the U.S. Senate race in North Carolina is hugely important this year. Both parties want the Senate majority. Right now, the chamber has a contentious 50-50 split. Democratic VP Kamala Harris casts tiebreaker votes. So both parties are vying for the 35 seats up for grabs next year, and North Carolina has one of with Senator Burr retiring. So let's look closely at the primary results here. President Donald Trump's endorsement, District 13 Congressman and Davie County native Ted Budd clinched a commanding win. He advances to November with 58% of the Republican vote. Look here at all this pink on the map. Budd won the Republican race in 99 counties. The only county he narrowly lost was Mecklenburg, home of Charlotte, where former Governor Pat McCrory was once mayor. On the Democratic side here, let's look at this. We have former Supreme Court Chief Justice Sherry Beasley advancing with a dominating 81% of the vote. All 100 counties chose her as the Democratic pick. She'll advance to November, and as Itanese said, if she were to win the general election, she would become North Carolina's first black U.S. senator. But the road to get there won't be easy. Beasley very narrowly lost her bid for re-election to the North Carolina State Supreme Court 2 years ago, and her race against Congressman Budd for Senate could be just as close. It'll be up to voters to decide come November. To test or not to test, to isolate or not to isolate. COVID confusion is spreading misinformation as the COVID pandemic evolves with new variants now. So let's verify, is it true you can leave isolation 5 days after a COVID infection begins? Our sources for this are Dr. Chris Uhl, infectious diseases physician with Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and a Boston University study, all confirming it's true.
If you have symptoms of COVID-19 or asymptomatic for COVID-19 and test positive, your isolation period can be over at the end of 5 days.
But he noted the conditions specified in the CDC's March 2022 guidance. Regardless of vaccine status, if you test positive for COVID, stay home at least 5 days and isolate from others in your home. Wear a mask if you do encounter others at home. End isolation at least 5 days after symptom onset. If you're fever-free, at least 24 hours without medication. If you did not have symptoms, end isolation at least 5 full days after your first positive test.
The caveat is that after that 5 days of isolation, when you're in public, in indoor spaces, you should wear a mask because there is a small chance you could still shed virus.
The Boston University study researched 92 vaccinated COVID positive patients with mild breakthrough infections. After day 5 of symptom onset, 17% still tested positive. But by day 10, the probability of COVID contagion was almost zero. Take note, this study accounted for Delta and Omicron, not their new variants like the BA strains.
These variants are somewhat more contagious than the original Omicron variant, but fortunately aren't any more severe.
So we verified yes. In most cases, you can leave isolation 5 days after COVID symptoms start or 5 days after your first positive test. However, masking through day 10 is crucial when out in public, especially inside, in case you're still contagious. Experts say as long as you follow those 2 rules, you don't have to keep testing until you're negative. The test could be detecting some virus particles that are no longer contagious. However, if your COVID case was severe, meaning you were very sick or you have a weakened immune system, the CDC recommends a longer isolation period of 10 to 20 days. With your Verify, I'm Meghann Mollerus.